They're not cavalry, Captain. They're Australian light horse, mounted infantry. You can tell them by the plumes in their hats. They're formidable soldiers, but the English don't know how to use them.
Hi there, and welcome back to my channel. We're talking about The Lighthorsemen today from 1987. It's an Australian film because it's August, and in August, that's what I like to talk about. This one is set in 1917, so First World War, and the British are kind of stuck in front of the Turkish German lines in Palestine, and their only hope is a bold move by the Australian Lighthorsemen. Very dramatic. It's directed by Simon Wincer, who did The Phantom and Lonesome Dove later on. Lonesome Dove is like a kind of a TV series, and it's awesome. So it stars Peter Phelps, Nick Waters, Gary Sweet. There's a bunch of guys in this, and it also has Sigrid Thornton as kind of the romantic, pretty much the only woman in this film in a way. So it's based on the Battle of Beersheba and the Ride of the Lighthorsemen, which is all real stuff, and it's really well documented. So this film doesn't really take any liberties with historical fact, but the film opens really powerfully on some horsemen rounding up and galloping horses across the Australian countryside and back to the farm where they're going to be shipped to be used in the war effort. So it's amazingly shot. There's, horses galloping, there's kind of close-ups and wide shots, and the camera's soaring around, and I mean it's really good. So it really kind of sets you up for the tone of this film. It's very epic. It's very, widescreen kind of format stuff. It's a horse movie. I mean, it is about the men who fought in the war and their kind of mateship with each other, which is kind of a running theme in Australian movies a little bit. This kind of men in tough situations and their important bonds. But it's a horse movie. Which is great. I love horses, so kind of love this movie. Yeah, it's made in 87, so it's kind of a bit of an 80s era film. There's no big hair or anything like that, but it's got themes that, like I was saying, kind of turn up a lot in this era. Mateship, toughness, bonding, physicality, kind of jokes and friendly teasing of each other, and also something that you kind of see most predominantly in a film like Gallipoli. There's this kind of Britain versus Australia thing where the British people are a little softer and not as tough as the kind of hardened Australian, but the British are quite happy to sacrifice Australian troops because they suck, basically, in these movies. So the Battle of Gallipoli, again, a historical thing, is probably the thing that the movie really foregrounds. That this film it's there, but it's not pushed so hard. So yeah, this movie is kind of like watching a poem or like a ballad or something. The shots are almost like lyrical in some way. It's like the lighting is beautiful, and everything's kind of got like a slightly mythic, epic, heroic, great stakes kind of stuff, which is pretty, I don't know, it's like kind of designed to be very moving, but it's kind of successful at that as well. I think the battle and the ride of the horsemen at the end is like, it's kind of accurate. Yeah, and that there's a final kind of scene of them riding as a distraction, like right towards the enemy that have machine guns, and they're in a row on their horses, and it's this like long scene, and it's like I couldn't look away. Like, it's so good. So this, to see this in cinemas on the big screen must have been like just really powerful experience. Yeah, but I will say it's a little heavy because there was a bit of patriotism in Australia in the 80s. It was the bicentennial of the country, and that quite a lot of films wanted to foreground or show, you know, patriotism or patriotic themes. So it's not super like cheerleadery or nationalistic, but there's definitely there's some kind of moments with British characters that just kind of made me laugh because I was like, it's a bit on the nose. Yeah, just this kind of idea of like, yeah, the British people were useless and we saved the day. And like in the movie, there's a bit where a bunch of British soldiers start kind of singing a song to the Australian guys that walk into a bar. So it's like, it's a bit over the top, and yet there's kind of some evidence and stuff that kind of thing did happen. So I don't know. It's just kind of a funny thing to see in a film. I don't think you would see that now. But yeah, I think I've already kind of said that the photography is beautiful. They team it with some really like soaring music that just really, everything feels very heightened and very, they're kind of creating from something real. They're really pushing the heroic human sort of angle. Like, these are real people that were in a real battle and they had real feelings, and the bond between the men and their horses and the respect for each other, and it's very kind of emotive, and a good story teamed with beautiful photography, and that music is like kind of gets to you. I think the horses running through the landscape, I know some critics at the time were like, this movie is just horses. That's not true, but there are a lot of horses in this. So yeah, it's nice to see Sigrid Thornton pop up in a movie. I really love Sea Change, which is an Australian TV show. She's the lead in that, but she was in a lot of things. She's also in The Man from Snowy River, I think. So it almost feels like she was the woman or the girl in like the films of this era. Obviously there were other women, but I don't know, it's kind of, she's sort of almost emblematic of that time in Australian cinema. She's a romantic figure, and I kind of love her, so I had a soft spot for her as soon as she popped up in this movie. I was like, oh, there she is. With her little, she's so funny. She's a nurse and got the romantic interest of one of the characters. And again, she kind of helps humanize people and give them a little story, because we get to know the character through her relationship with them and that kind of thing. But also she's got this little nurse's cap with this kind of frizzy, curled, fringy bangs sticking out the front, which is, I don't know, it's like a little 80s thing snuck in there, a little 80s perm snuck into the film. But yeah, she is good in this. Towards the end, we don't know whether her love interest is dead or not, and she's sort of running around looking for him at the hospital where the people are being brought in, the injured are being brought in. So that's kind of a nice moment because we give a shit about whether he's alive or not, and clearly she does too, so that's good. But the key thing are the bonds between the guys. So they kind of, their friendship keeps each other alive and keeps each other motivated. So when someone is injured or killed, it's kind of devastating. So yeah, the performances are not too bad. There's a couple of ones I really like and a couple where I'm like, they're not great, but they don't ruin the film. But I think caring about these people because you're following them through the film and building your own kind of relationship and investment in them, building up to this maneuver, this crazy ride towards death at the end. It just creates this really strong emotional impact. So yeah, and I like that there's a character who played by Peter Phelps, who he's so eager to sign up, but when he gets there, he doesn't find it so easy to kill people. And so he joins the medical corps, but when they all ride off into battle and he sees them getting shot at, he can't let them go without him. He can't hold back, so he runs off as well and joins the ride of the Lighthorsemen. I think that's nice because people understand in the film, you know, that it's not like just glorified, like let's murder a bunch of people. You know, it's war and it's tough, and they don't blame him for not being able to just kill people. But in the end, it comes down to them or his friends, and he has to step up, and I think that's kind of just interesting. There's no sort of white feathers in this situation. Also, there's a lovely kind of horrible scene where a horse gets injured, and the rider of that horse has to shoot it because it's too injured. It won't survive. And it's like a horrible scene, but he's crying as he does it, and it's like, it's so emotional. So yeah, the horses are valued. So yeah, the final scenes after the ride, there's some great tension where they have to, you know, cross the enemy line or try to, and they do end up, there's kind of a run at the end where a guy has to get in and stop something from happening. I don't want to tell you too much, but yeah, after that he comes out and the day has been saved, but it's heartbreaking where friends look for each other and not everybody makes it, and most of the men that rode did make it, but a bunch didn't as well. So it's very emotional. The ride at the end is insanity. Like, I don't know, it's something about the way it's shot. You're just really like glued to the movie. The horses are shot so beautifully, in motion, and it's I don't know, it's just kind of fascinating that people did this, and it's so much better than that scene in Ben-Hur. Like, it's so good. Also, just important to note, mentioning Ben-Hur, a lot of horses were killed in the making of that film, but no horses were harmed or injured in the making of this one. So yeah, so the film's very of its time. Like I mentioned, the bicentenary had just come out, and sort of, maybe not patriotism, but like a pride in where you came from was kind of at the fore, which was nice, because there's a thing in Australia known as the cultural cringe, where people sort of feel that Australia has no culture or has no history, and there's a kind of cringy feeling people sometimes get in Australia about sort of Australian culture or occurrism or things like that. So yeah, this film kind of pushed through that and was part of a different movement that was showing Australia it could be proud of itself, and it did have its own history and events and people it could be proud of and look up to. It's such an epic film. It's big. I kind of love this movie. Also because it's pretty historically accurate. It's it really tries to kind of, I think the main characters are kind of based on people, but all of the other stuff is really factual. So that's cool, because it's not like propaganda kind of or nationalistic. It's just kind of proud, and it's nice when that kind of pride is based on facts and figures and historical research and stuff like that. I think some critics kind of complained when it came out that it was like, is this a documentary or is it a movie, But I'm like, it's a movie based on real events. I mentioned before the film Gallipoli. It's a little bit like that, but less kind of British bashing. So this is more a film about courage and friendship and war and bravery and man's relationship with his horse and all that kind of good stuff. Amusingly, when I was reading up on this, having just watched this film and kind of looking into it a little bit more deeply, I loved all the sort of the way it was accurate to history. But it wasn't well received by US critics, which kind of makes sense because it's a very Australian film. So I don't know if US viewers, might not have gotten as much out of it just, because it's a different country or whatever. But I do think American films sometimes can be very straight up nationalistic or patriotic or that kind of thing. And it might be uncomfortable for someone whose country manufactures that kind of thing to watch the patriotism of somewhere else. I don't know. It's just something that I kind of thought of. The other thing is, I think there's a bit of a... this film came out in the 80s, as I said, and we have certain events in Australia or certain days where we kind of look at this kind of war and have like a remembrance for that. So I won't go into too much, but there's kind of a common thing now that I heard from some of my friends in Australia where they're saying like, oh, we don't like to celebrate Anzac Day because it's, it's not really fair on the Turkish because, it's kind of like glorifying, Turkish people would hate us celebrating this. And I have a family that live in Turkey, and the war memorial for Australian soldiers in Turkey, which is at Gallipoli, so not this area of Palestine, obviously, but Australian soldiers are really well respected and well remembered in Turkey. And the war memorial for Australian soldiers in Turkey is beautiful. It's well tended. It has this beautiful letter about written on the memorial about how the Turkish people respect the bravery of the Australian soldiers and kind of look on them as lost sons that they will take care of in their own country, if that kind of makes sense. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing when you look at how these things develop over time, that Australians are kind of in a place where they don't want to be celebrating something that they see as problematic, which, we're all kind of looking at these things now. But actually the Turkish people saw how the Australian soldiers fought and had a lot of respect for them. And I think Australians have a lot of respect for Turkish people too, and their situation. I mean, war is crazy. And so I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing, because I think the perception is so interesting of how we saw Australian soldiers more historically, how we look as Australians, how we look at that war now and feel differently, and how we sort of think, well, the other side of this war may not like us celebrating this, but then the other side is actually celebrating it. Do you know what I mean? It's an interesting kind of concept change or paradigm shift, I guess. So anyway, just to kind of come full circle, The Lighthorsemen is definitely, if you're kind of a horse person, it's kind of a good movie just from that perspective. It's beautifully shot, so if you kind of like cinematography and things like that, or there's sort of those big war action, sweeping battle kind of sequences, it's great for that. I wouldn't necessarily look it up for the performances. They're not bad or anything, but I feel like they're what give the film meaning rather than what the film rests on. And it's also an interesting kind of historical moment to look into, like a little story of human bravery and camaraderie and that kind of thing. And yeah, it's nice. At the end of the film, there's like the little title cards that come up that tell you what happened to everybody in the film, or the people they were based on, like afterwards, which is always, I don't know, that can be kind of emotional or uplifting. So yeah, if you're into Australian film, this is a big one. It's about 2 hours long as well, so yeah, it's an interesting one. If you've seen this movie, I'm sure some of you are like, it's too long, or it's too many horses, or I didn't get it, or whatever. I will have a chat with you in the comments if you have something you want to add about it, especially like any of the things I talked about around it, because I think some of those things are kind of interesting as contexts for things change, or we understand more about the world. You know, the world's much more global than it used to be. So yeah, that's The Lighthorsemen, and thanks for watching.